They hired me to care for their grandmother, an old woman tucked away in a golden prison forgotten by the family that owed her everything. At first, it was just a job. Change her linens, prepare her meals, give her pills on time. They didn't care who watched her just as long as she stayed quiet. But something in her eyes told me she remembered more than they wanted her to. She would stare at the fireplace like it still burned with secrets. Sometimes, she'd call me by another name one I didn't recognize. At first, then one night, I found a hidden compartment in the master's study. Inside, a dusty box filled with documents, a faded photograph, and a letter written in trembling hands. What I read in that letter didn't just change my life, it shattered theirs. And it made me realize they hadn't paid me to care for Grandma, they'd paid me to forget her. But I didn't. Before the mansion, before the secrets, my world was much simpler. Hard, but simple. I lived in a tiny two-room apartment with my little brother, Matteo. We shared everything: meals, blankets, even silence when the power went out and we couldn't afford the bill. After our mother passed, I became everything to him: sister, mother, provider. And even though I was just 24, the weight on my shoulders felt like I was carrying a lifetime. I worked 2 jobs, one cleaning offices at night and one helping out at a neighborhood clinic during the day. I dreamed of becoming a nurse, but dreams are expensive, and rent doesn't wait for ambition to catch up. Every week, I scanned bulletin boards and online listings, praying for something better. That's when I saw the ad: live-in caregiver needed, high pay, discretion required. It felt too good to be true, but when I called, they didn't ask much. They just wanted someone who wouldn't ask questions. I told myself, maybe this is our shot. Maybe this is the break we've been waiting for. The next morning, I packed my things and kissed Matteo goodbye. He hugged me like I was leaving for war. I promised him I'd be back in a few months with enough money to pay off the debts, maybe even enroll in school. I had no idea the job I was walking into wasn't just about caring for someone's grandmother. It was about stepping into a world where wealth masked rot and silence had a price. And behind one locked door, the truth had been waiting for someone like me to find it. The first time I saw the Delacroix estate, I felt like I was stepping into a different planet. The iron gates creaked open slowly, revealing a mansion that looked like it had been carved out of history itself: stone walls, manicured gardens, fountains that never stopped running. Everything was beautiful and cold. A housekeeper greeted me, barely looking up from her clipboard. No warm welcome, no smile. Just rules. No entering the East Wing, no conversations with the family unless spoken to, no personal items in shared spaces, and absolutely no questions. Inside, the walls were lined with oil portraits of stiff-faced ancestors, like they were watching every move I made. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they echoed. It was the kind of place where time felt frozen, and feelings weren't allowed. Then I met her, Mrs. Delacroix, the woman I was hired to care for. She sat in a grand armchair by the window, wrapped in a velvet shawl, staring out into the garden like she was looking for someone who never came back. She didn't speak much that first day, just looked at me for a long time. Then she said, quietly, "You're not like the others." I didn't know what she meant, but something in her voice made me feel seen. The family, her son and his wife, barely acknowledged her. They spoke around her, not to her. They treated me like a piece of furniture, useful only if I kept quiet and stayed in my lane. But I couldn't help noticing the strange things. A locked study no one was allowed to enter, a photo in the hallway with someone's face scratched out, whispers in the night behind closed doors. I came to that house thinking I'd be invisible, but the truth had already noticed me, and it was waiting. At first, I told myself to ignore it, the strange looks, the hushed arguments behind closed doors. This was just a job. Keep your head down, get paid, go home. But some things don't let you look away, especially when they don't make sense. Mrs. Delacroix, she started saying things, not all at once, just little drops of memory, like leaks in a dam. She'd whisper names I'd never heard before, mention birthdays that didn't match her family's. Sometimes, she'd grip my hand and say, "They erased her, but I remember. I always remember." I thought maybe it was the medication or age, until I saw the photo. It was tucked into a drawer in her room, hidden under old scarves and broken jewelry. A family portrait, years old. There were 6 people smiling in that frame, but the one standing next to Mrs. Delacroix had their face scratched out with something sharp. Angrily, repeatedly. That same day, I walked past the study, the one they always kept locked, and I heard voices. Mr. Delacroix and his wife were arguing. I didn't catch everything, but I heard enough. If she talks, it's over. Then make sure she doesn't. My stomach turned. Was I imagining things? Was I just tired? But then I found the letter. Well, half of one. It was torn, stuffed into the bottom of the laundry bin like someone tried to hide it in a hurry. The handwriting was shaky but clear. It said, "If anything happens to me, they'll tell you it was natural. Don't believe them. Ask about the will. Ask about the child." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. I thought this job would help me take care of my brother. I thought I'd found safety. But now I was inside something deeper. Darker. Part of me wanted to walk away. Pretend I never saw the photo. Forget the torn letter. Ignore the way Mrs. Delacroix cried in her sleep. But another part of me, something louder, whispered, "Keep looking." Because whatever was buried in that house, it wasn't just the past. It was someone's truth. And somehow, I was the only one willing to uncover it. I tried to let it go. I told myself I was just to help. Whatever secrets this family had, they weren't mine to uncover. But every time I looked at Mrs. Delacroix, I knew she wanted me to. She started giving me hints without really saying much. One day, she handed me a hairbrush and whispered, "He used to hide things where no one would think to look. He always said the truth should stay close to the head." I didn't understand at first. But that night, I checked inside the drawer where she kept her brushes. There, taped beneath the bottom of the drawer, was a tiny brass key. Old, worn, with initials engraved so faintly, I had to hold it up to the light to see. J.D. James Delacroix, her late husband. My heart pounded. I didn't know what it unlocked, but I had a pretty good guess. The study. I waited until everyone left for a charity gala. The staff was busy preparing. The house was quiet. I slipped the key into the lock. It clicked. And suddenly, I was standing in a room that had been frozen in time. Stacks of papers covered the desk. Old file boxes lined the bookshelves. But one thing caught my eye. A small black diary, resting under a framed photo of Mr. and Mrs. Delacroix from decades ago. It felt too intentional, too placed. I opened it. Inside, page after page, James had written about his fears before his death, about how his children, especially his son, had become greedy, desperate for power, about how the original will had been rewritten behind his back, how someone close to him had falsified signatures. And then I saw it. If anyone ever finds this, know the truth. There was another child, one I was never allowed to name, but she was mine, and so is what they've stolen from her. A photo slipped from the back of the diary. It was a baby, swaddled, unlabeled. But something about that baby, the shape of the eyes, it looked like someone I knew. It looked like me. I dropped the book, hands shaking. Could it be possible? Was I connected to this family by blood? Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Voices. They were back. And if they found me in here, everything would be over. I grabbed the diary, the key, and the photo, and ran. That night, for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was still a caregiver or a threat to a powerful family's carefully built lies. The next morning, everything felt different. The air in the house was heavier. Eyes followed me more than usual. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was loaded. They knew, or at least, they suspected. Mrs. Delacroix didn't speak at all that day. She just held my hand tighter than she ever had before. Her fingers trembled like her soul was trying to say something her mouth couldn't. Later, as I was bringing her tea, I heard raised voices from the hallway. Mer Delacroix, his wife, the housekeeper. My name. They were talking about me. She's been snooping. My office was unlocked. What if she knows? What if she found it? We should have never hired someone from out there. Like I was some stray dog who wandered too close to the porcelain. Then came the knock. Hard, sharp. I opened the door and found the housekeeper standing stiff as stone. "You're being let go," she said coldly. No explanation. No eye contact. "Pack your things. You'll be driven back into town by noon." I didn't argue. I nodded. Closed the door. And broke down. I had nothing. No savings. No proof. Just a diary, a key, and a baby photo of someone who might be me, or might not. I sat beside Mrs. Delacroix one last time. She looked weaker than ever, like she knew this was goodbye. Then, just as I stood to leave, she whispered, "Don't be afraid. The truth doesn't need permission," and slipped something into my coat pocket. It was another letter, signed, sealed, with a gold crest I hadn't seen before. That was when I stopped being scared, because I realized something. They had power, but I had proof. They had a house full of secrets, but I had the key. They could fire me, threaten me, bury me in silence, but they couldn't erase what was real. And I had just enough courage and just enough rage to do what they feared most. Tell the world. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up reading the letter Mrs. Delacroix had slipped into my coat. It was addressed to a law firm. Inside was everything: names, dates, account numbers, even a handwritten confession. Proof that the original will had been altered after James Delacroix died. Proof that the child he fathered outside the marriage had been erased. Hidden. Silenced. But not anymore. I called the firm listed on the letter. At first, they didn't believe me, until I read them the code stamped at the top of the document, the one only James and his lawyer shared. There was a long pause. Then the man on the phone said, "We've been waiting for this. Comin' today." By the time I arrived, the family had already been contacted. Lawyers were circling the mansion like sharks. Suddenly, all that silence had turned to screaming. Mr. Delacroix tried to deny everything, said I was lying, said I'd manipulated an old woman for money. But then came the diary, the key. The photo, the signature, and finally Mrs. Delacroix herself. They brought her in quietly, in a wheelchair, wrapped in the same velvet shawl she always wore. Her voice was weak, but her words were clear. I begged them to do the right thing. They buried the truth because they were ashamed. But shame doesn't erase blood. She looked at me, and for the first time, she said my name, my real name, the one James had chosen, Amara. There was a silence in the room, so thick you could feel it pressing against your chest. Then the lawyer read the original will. It named his firstborn, his true firstborn, as the rightful heir, the one they'd hidden, the one they'd paid to care for a woman they thought had forgotten everything. They didn't know. She remembered it all. The inheritance, the shares, the estate, everything they'd built their lives on was now in dispute. A full investigation was launched. Forensic experts confirmed the signatures had been forged. Funds were traced. Lies were unraveled. And the Delacroix name, once whispered with respect and fear, became a scandal that filled headlines. I didn't care about the money. I didn't even care about the house. I cared that the truth finally had a voice, and for once, it spoke through someone like me, a nobody they never saw coming. A girl from nowhere, carrying everything they tried to bury the day the papers were signed. I didn't feel rich. I felt quiet, like a storm had passed, and all that was left was the sound of my own breathing. The lawyers handed me documents, titles, deeds, access codes. I signed them with hands still shaking from everything I had lost and everything I had just found. But the real moment didn't come with ink or money. It came when I went back to that estate, not as a servant, but as someone who finally had a name, a place, a truth no one could steal. Mrs. Delacroix sat on the same velvet chair by the window. She smiled when she saw me, not as an employee, but as something more. "You made it," she whispered. "They tried to erase you, but you were never invisible, Amara, never." I knelt beside her and held her hand, and for the first time, I cried, not from fear or sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen. The staff treated me differently now. With respect, with silence. Some of them left, some stayed, but the house, it felt lighter, like the ghosts had been named and finally set free. I didn't keep everything. I donated a large part of the inheritance, started a foundation in my mother's name, bought a small home outside the city for my brother and me, a quiet place with real peace. And every morning, I wake up knowing who I am, not because of wealth, not because of headlines, but because I dared to listen when someone whispered the truth. Because I followed the trail of a forgotten life and found my own. Sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom. It comes in the form of a locked drawer, a trembling hand, and the courage to keep going when the world says you don't belong. But I did belong, and now I finally live like it. Sometimes life gives you answers in whispers, not shouts, not in courtroom victories or camera flashes, but in quiet rooms, old letters, and the soft grip of a trembling hand that refuses to forget. I used to think justice belonged to the powerful, to the ones with money, with lawyers, with long names and long shadows. But I've learned that real justice can live in the hands of the forgotten, in the heart of someone who's been told they're no one until they prove otherwise. What I uncovered wasn't just a secret, it was a second chance for truth, for legacy, for a name that was nearly erased. They tried to bury it all under wealth and shame. But truth doesn't rot, it waits. And sometimes it chooses the most unexpected voice to speak through. I wasn't meant to find any of this. I wasn't meant to open that drawer or read that letter or walk into that house at all. But I did. And in doing so, I reminded them and myself that even the smallest light can expose the darkest corners. So if you're listening to this, wondering if the truth is worth the risk, let me say this: sometimes the truth hides behind silk curtains, but even the poorest hands can pull them open. And when they do, the whole world has to look.